Welcome to the show, Jeff. I am excited to have you.
Great. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, you are listening to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, and we are the exclusive podcast for the EAS industry, here to help anyone and everyone who believes that horses are a beautiful partner for us as humans. Jeff, you have an interesting background and something that's a little bit unique to the show, and I'm thrilled to share it with the audience today. So, you have a background in leadership development, corporate leadership development. And why don't you tell us just a little bit about who you are, what makes, you, you, and how you ended up where you are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. My name's Jeff Arnold, as you mentioned. I started my career. This is my 30th year of consulting with both for-profits and nonprofits. And I started my career as an engineer or in an engineering capacity. I have a degree in engineering management, but I got pulled into an industrial engineering consulting firm. And so I was always helping people with processes and how long it should take to do certain activities. And it's kind of funny because in that part of my career, I always was more interested in the people side of that than the technical or the scientific or the engineering side of how to do a piece of a process or a task. And so that was always my favorite area, was watching people be able to do something because they were inspired to do it instead of because they were told to do it, and having them be part of the process. And so as I got, to be more of advanced beyond being a junior consultant, I started to learn, oh, this stuff all is in the realm of people and organizational development and leadership development. And that's where my career began. And always felt strongly about all of us being leaders and every person being viewed as a leader. In fact, when I left the corporate consulting world officially to start Leadership Adventures, one of the first things we did was we decided, how are we going to define leadership, And we started by taking a transformational leadership definition that maybe was coined by John Maxwell or one of the leadership gurus, and said, if you're going to define leadership in one word, it's real simple. It's influence. And when you think about leadership from that perspective, everybody has influence.
Right.
And like, we sometimes we'll have people challenge that and say, well, I'm not a leader, right? And we'll say, well, give yourself this test. If you got out of bed this morning, you're a leader of one. And it starts there, right? And so we try to look at leadership in the context of every person has influence. And so everybody is a leader, and we're on a journey. You can be on a journey. We're all on a journey of becoming a better leader. And
Mhm.
we like to say that journey has twists and turns and summits and plummets, we call it, you can read all kinds of books on becoming a better leader, right? It doesn't necessarily make you a better leader. You have to apply the stuff in this
Right.
thing we live in called real life
Mhm.
and see what happens. This might work in this situation, but it doesn't in that one. And so you have to learn how to adjust. And so we're very careful as we work with folks in developing people as leaders that, we're not talking about if your title is this, then you're a leader, right? Or only if you're on the management team, you're a leader. We
Right.
look at everybody is a leader. And it starts, when you want to start becoming a better leader and thinking about how you do that. So
Absolutely. So tell me about Leadership Adventures. Just give me a brief snapshot of it. So that's what you're doing now, right? And tell me a little bit about what that business does and what you guys help folks with.
yeah, sure. I mean, we have three different primary arms of the business: consulting, training, and coaching. But the crux of our mission is all around enabling organizations to unleash the horsepower within their people. And
Mhm.
so, in a world where every organization is talking about technology and AI and how we're going to use that, we love that stuff and we believe in it. We love all the techie gadgets, and we have all that stuff. But I've also seen over many years of working with organizations that what most often gets left out of all that is the people side.
Mm.
It's great to buy a new piece of software to run your barn or your, right, but
Mhm.
the part that gets left out is, did we involve our people in selecting it? Did they tell us what's going to work for them and what's not? Did we invest the right amount in training them and then getting feedback to modify it? A lot of times it's, people want kind of like a magic pill. right? This is going to solve our issue in staffing. And so they buy a massive software package, and then they say, how come this hasn't solved our problem in staffing? It's like, well,
Mhm.
did we actually get anybody on board or help them to use it? So our focus is, it's a little bit of a back to basics approach. We're not, doing something counter to all the technological and AI stuff going on. We're simply being a complementary partner, complement with an E, right? Complementary partner, where we feel like you have to blend in that people side and
Yeah.
helping people develop through that process and see how they can grow. And so that's what our organization is focused on overall. And we have small clients that are, small businesses or nonprofits, and we have very large clients,
Mhm.
Coca-Cola and Shell. And, those are some of our clients that we work with in helping to develop their people. And it's kind of funny because we're working with a small center. Maybe it's a small center that has 3 people, or whether it's a large multinational company, the problems you find are most often they're the same. And so
Mhm.
many of them relate to people problems, where it's communication issues or it's trust issues. Over the last year,
Mhm.
that's probably been our most requested topic, is we
Yeah.
need help with trust, right? And so yeah, so it's kind of interesting from that perspective. But that's what our business leadership adventures focuses on, and why it's called Leadership Adventures. It's
Mhm.
about helping people work through the adventure of becoming a better leader, and helping organizations do that with their individuals and teams.
I love that. And I just want to commend you for looking at the people side of things, right? Because in our world today, everything is so digital and automatic and, tech and yada yada. And so
Yeah.
so you said you work with some nonprofits, and we're going to get into sort of your equine hat and the equine adventures that you've been on, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's talk just briefly about maybe you said some of those, problems, quote unquote, or things that people tend to struggle with. Um, what are some of those problems? You said maybe communication and trust, maybe, but what do you see most often in nonprofits as something for people to work on?
Well, when you kind of step back and look at how people develop as leaders, right? Think about it like dropping a rock, or some kind of big flat rock into a pond.
Hmm.
Everybody's probably done that, right? And when you do that, you drop a rock into a pond and you watch the series of ripples that bubble out from that, right? And they get bigger usually as they go out further. And so if you take that series of ripples and you think about it as leadership, and you think about the center where the rock hits the water, that's an area of leadership development called leading yourself.
Okay.
And if you learn to lead yourself well, then it creates that second ripple out where you might get asked to lead others. And if you do that well, you might get asked to lead teams, the next ripple out. And if you do that well, you might get to asked to lead a department and then lead a location, and the furthest ripple out's like leading the whole organization or being on a leadership team of the whole organization. So, um, you know, when you think about that, and then in the context of your question, what have you seen the most often, right? I like to liken it to those areas. So a lot of what we see is there's not enough emphasis on self-awareness, which is
Mm.
that leading yourself part, and that of course expands in leading others and leading teams. A lot of times people get promoted into roles because they were really good at the task work, right? So I was
That is
really
such a
good
good
at,
point.
yeah, I was great at doing this in the barn, and so I'm going to be the barn manager. And that's wonderful. But how do we ensure that you have all the other things you need to be the barn manager, right?
Mhm.
And so there's, what do they bring to the table most naturally? And how do I build from that in a way that's going to help them advance through these stages from leading yourself to leading others to leading teams, right? And so it's that kind of stuff that we most often see, and we definitely see in the nonprofit side in general, but particularly in the therapeutic horsemanship center or that realm. We see a lot of folks very high, in empathy, in those types of areas, and that's probably why you got into this organizational kind of business, right? Because
Mhm.
you love helping people. And That's great. We often see the missing component of, okay, do we have the ability as a center or as an organization to think about it like sets of lenses you might look through in eyeglasses, where you got to look through the lens that is all about your heart and your mission, the mission of your center. It should drive everything you do. It's why you exist, right?
Right.
At the same time, do you have the capability to take off that set of glasses, put on a different set that looks through different lenses, that look at things like what's the profitability of the programs we do, right? And not make every decision based on that, but at least understand it. Oh, okay, we do this kind of programming. Doesn't really make any money for our center. Not that we're not for profit. We're not trying to make money, but we do know that money is required to do more of our mission.
Right.
And so that's one of the areas I see a lot as I visit and talk to centers. And I visited centers all over the country. I was on business in Hawaii one time and found the local center there and went there. I always try to go when I'm somewhere and see where's the nearest center that I can go to and take a tour and see what they're doing. And, a lot of them I found have similar problems where, everybody's looking for funding and sustainability, and nobody has time to do that, right? And what we tried to bring to the table in being kind of a bridge between centers and the local corporate or business community was I saw this need that centers had for this new pair of glasses that helped them look at different ways to get funding and thinking about things from that lens periodically. And then I saw companies that were looking for creative ways to build their people through experiential learning. And, I just learned so much about leading myself from working and partnering with horses that it was a natural for us to start to build some offerings around that. But that's, to answer your question about what do I see with people and with centers, I think it's probably around that biggest part of the splash that when you drop the rock in of leading yourself and leading others that gets missed or sometimes gets just accelerated, maybe skipped over a few things. And then from more the center's perspective, that how do we get creative in figuring out how to find new funding sources? Because a lot of centers I work with, they're trying to grow. And I often use the old adage, remember what got us here might not be the thing that's going to get us there to the next thing we're trying to get to. So we can't get stuck that's the way we do everything. We got to say, okay, what's going to be new? How do we refresh this and look for new and different ways?
Right. I love that you brought up sustainability because I think that's such a huge topic right now, especially in the EAS industry, is sustainability for our programming, which you're right. How do we get creative with funding and how do we, get everybody engaged and on board to find that funding, or participate in that fundraiser or whatever it is. And I think so much of that comes back to how are we developing our people to feel empowered to want to do that, right? Like they're not here just to put in their hours and, see their participants and go home, but that they're engaged and feel like they can use their strengths to help, strengthen the organization. We, as an organization for HETRA, did the Gallup Strengths Finder. Everybody did it, and we all found out what our strengths are and, yada, yada. And you kind of think to yourself like, oh, this is kind of corny. Like, I'm empathy number one, and everybody goes around and says their strengths. But since we did that and really started to spend some time looking at who each of us as unique people are that make up our organization, and which strengths we have and maybe which ones we don't, we've really created so much more of a balanced team and it feels more supportive. And I think, and that's not necessarily because we did a bunch of, team bonding exercises, but because we spent time looking at ourselves individually and how we fit together as a puzzle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that particular assessment, it's one of the ones we use in some of our workshops. So we packaged up as part of our training and experiential training, we packaged up a series of courses and workshops that can be used for helping organizations develop their people as leaders while partnering with a horse. So it gets corporate groups to come into a center and get their feet in the door. And we know how important that is, right? Because a lot of them don't even know that these centers exist. And then you say, oh, we got this unique way to develop people. And so We built a series of courses that touch on a number of topics. One of them is leading yourself and leading others, and we have a number of these kinds of assessments from Myers-Briggs to DISC to Clifton Strengths worked into our courses. And it's kind of funny. I've actually sat with the folks at Gallup who own Clifton Strengths, and we've paged through all of our detail of our modules, and they tell me it's the only one that they've gone through that uses the strength stuff in a way that really follows how they designed it and so forth. Because as you said, it's not about saying, oh, you have communication in your top themes, in your top strengths. Therefore, you should write our newsletter, right? And I shouldn't, because it's not one of my top ones. That's not how you use this stuff. It's more about saying, oh, I'd love for you to help us write the newsletter. Before we start, look at some of the things you do most naturally and the best, and tell me how you think you can apply that to helping us make a great newsletter. And so it's a shifting of that, right? And like with the horses, we often talk about in that particular workshop, we look at, what do you think some of a horse's most natural talents and strengths are? Naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. What do you think? Of course, we can't get into how a horse thinks or feels necessarily.
I wish we could.
Yeah, I wish we could too, but we can look at patterns of behavior. Oh, this one seems when this one comes in the arena, boy, she comes in with presence, and she really takes control of things. And so we can kind of see some things, and we start to think about, what happens when you work with that, when you're working with the horse as a partner, and what would happen if you worked against that, right? So we're drawing parallels in our workshops. All of our equine workshops, we call it the Equine Assisted Leadership Development Academy, or EALDA, these packaged workshops. They're all done on the ground. So there's nobody's getting on a horse or riding or anything like that. And we're simply helping organizations to draw parallels through experiential learning of things that will help them remember how to apply this with people. So you don't come out of our workshops a better horse person, you come out a better leader.
Right.
Yeah, you come out with new things now to go and practice, but the data and the research says that through experiential learning, people retain almost 90% more. So just think about that. More than traditional learning methods, which includes lecture. It also includes e-learning and self-paced modules on the computer. So you can retain 90% more of the stuff you learn by doing it experientially. And so everything we're doing with partnering with horses in our workshops, it's all related to helping you remember how to apply that with people.
Right.
Because as you know, so many great parallels between leading people and leading horses. I know a lot of times we'll bring a horse out to the arena in front of a group that's there for a workshop, and we'll say, okay, we're going to define leadership as influence. Here's a great example. Here's a 1,200-pound animal, and I don't care how big and strong you are, you can't move it 1 inch, right? You can't. You don't have enough strength anyway, right? But the reality is, how do you make the horse partner with you? How do you partner together to do something? Well, you exhibit influence. And that's what leaders do. And you have to figure out how to do that. It's not the same with every horse. It's not the same with every person, and there's good influence and bad influence, right? So we start the conversation that way. And that's kind of how we sort of begin to change their mindset. When they come to our workshops, we ask them, take off your hat of what you do every day at work, because we all know you do all these different things at your company. Take all that, and you have to learn now, here's a new team member I have to partner with. How do we get the best out of each other? How do we partner together to get the thing done we're trying to get done, but through the process, not only bring out the best of us, but help us feel energized and engaged and really excited about it, and bring our whole selves to the party,
Right.
And so, horses as the immediate feedback giver. I mean, they they don't care about your title or what you do. You're right. They're because of who they are, what they are. They're constantly looking at things through a different prism, and so we have to sort of think about how we can partner together that way.
And I never really put these two things together before, until I was just listening to you kind of talk about the influence that you have on the horse, and vice versa, is I wish I could tell you how much time we spend in the EAS industry trying to keep our horse herd sustainable and prevent burnout and make sure they're happy in their job and make sure no one's telling them, what to do too much, but they're also not telling us what to do. We spend so much time as horse people watching horse behavior and trying to prevent ultimately, accidents or, big things happening in our arena with our participants because safety is always number one. And now I'm thinking to myself, what a world it would be if we spent as much time looking at our organization employees with the same lens, right? Because trying to keep our people sustainable and prevent burnout in our humans, is also what makes the world go round. It's not just our horses that are getting burned out, right? And I think especially in the nonprofit sector, we can get like that compassion fatigue or that just really high risk for burnout. And I don't know if you see that as well, kind of in your adventures, but that may be why doing leadership development like this is so important, is if we want to create sustainability in our people and prevent burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody is struggling with the burnout component. Some industries more than others,
Hmm.
especially as we went through the pandemic. And you heard a lot about burnout. You heard about physician and nurse burnout and things, right, from what was happening at that time. But in your industry with centers and therapeutic horsemanship centers, you see it a lot, and particularly on organizations that depend on volunteers. We developed an offering last year for centers because of a need, because we kept getting asked about it. But it was kind of like, oh, we've been doing this in for-profit industries for decades, but have we really thought about it for nonprofit? And we call it Center Saver. We call it because SAVER is an acronym for staff and volunteer engagement and retention. And so we actually look at employee engagement or staff and volunteer engagement through surveys to understand how engaged is our group and what
Right.
are the areas we can work on to get them more engaged, because the more engaged you are, all the data shows that all the organizational stuff, all the metrics, all the value that your riders and your customers receive, it all goes in the right direction by like double digit percentages if we can get people engaged. And we couple that with the area of leadership development we focus on. If there's like 10 or 12 major areas of leadership development categories. In one of them is called transformational leadership, and within that sits something called inspiring leadership. And so we try to focus on this area of inspiring leadership because, as I said, nobody wants to be told what to do. And we all know of working on something where you're told, now go and do this. Why is it the right way? Well, because we determined it is. Go and do it.
That's
And
the
it
way we've
just,
always done it.
yeah, it doesn't feel right, right? But it's, even if I know the answer, or I know what I think might be the right answer, it's much more impactful to ask people, what do you think we should do? Even if you know the top three things we should do. And it's amazing. One of our tenets of leadership is understanding that when you talk, you're not learning.
Mm.
And when you listen, you're learning. So if I can learn, and I would challenge all of your listeners to try this today, somewhere in your conversations or over the next week, try to get really good at asking your team open-ended questions so they can't answer yes or no. And really the hardest part of that, besides asking good questions, is learning how to be quiet.
Hmm.
I mean, we often say, like, you got to learn how to shut up and you got to be comfortable with it,
Hmm.
because humans are wired in our society. We think a normal conversation means filling all the space. And you try this and you'll write to me or you'll call, you'll say, oh my gosh, that's amazing how much that worked. If you learn to ask good open-ended questions and then learn to just zip, your mouth closed and listen, even if there's this awkward silence,
Hmm.
what happens in awkward silence with two people is we want to fill it. So if you're disciplined enough to keep your mouth closed, the other person will fill it.
Hmm.
They will continue on talking about what you ask them. And what that means is now I'm learning.
Hmm.
So when I'm talking, I'm not learning. When I'm listening, I'm learning. right? So this idea of being able to ask your team the right questions, it's amazing. Like in the concept of getting people engaged in a workforce, people will say to me, oh, we're doing lots with engagement of our staff. We're having a pizza lunch. And I always remind them, I say, that's wonderful. That's a great way to get people engaged. But there is no one who has ever left a company and said, you know what I loved about that company? They had the best pizza lunches, right? That's not how you engage people.
Right.
It's a wonderful thing to do, but the stuff that we teach people to do is all about engaging and inspiring people through how you change your conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's teaching you ways to ask new and compelling questions, right? And they can be simple things. I often ask people, before we start this meeting, tell me what's been the best part of your week so far. There's a great question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just shut up. And sometimes they'll say, what do you mean? And I'll say, I want to know what's been the best part of your week so far. And I pause and I close my mouth and I look at them and I give them space to answer because I want to hear what they say,
Mm-hmm.
and what they say often relates directly to what they have a lot of passion about.
Mm-hmm.
And if I learn that, I can get people and more inspired means more engaged, and more engaged means less burnout because it's fun. The stuff that you do that doesn't feel like work, that's the stuff you're really engaged in.
Mm-hmm.
So finding ways to have new conversations, and you might hear that and say, well, that doesn't sound hard. It's not hard. What's hard is getting people to put that into practice because
Mm-hmm.
it's behavior change. And
Right.
as a people developer, we all know that behavior change is the hardest change to make. It
For
requires
sure.
discipline. I have a colleague and he has a saying. He says, we learn as babies that nobody likes to be changed. Right. So I always thought that was kind of funny, right? But we have to learn some new questions, like simple questions that you
Mm-hmm.
can build into conversations. One of the ones that we often find through engagement surveys is um, people don't necessarily feel like they get recognized or appreciated.
Mm.
And so asking somebody the simple question of, Katie and I were at the center, we're walking around the barn, and maybe we were going to have a discussion on how we're going to do something coming up. And I say, hey, Katie, before we continue, I don't know that I've ever asked you this. How do you like to be recognized when
Mm-hmm.
things are, going well? Because sometimes I think about how people might, but I've never asked you, how do you like to be recognized?
Mm-hmm.
And then I just close my mouth and listen. And if I can get that person talking about it, I can find some unique ways to recognize them at the appropriate times, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we know from national engagement surveys, we know the top things that are not helping engagement. And we know that one of those is people don't understand they don't understand the expectations of them. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of the top ones. Of course, you have to look at this from your own center, but when you look at the data in aggregate, that's one of the ones last year from engagement surveys. People do not feel like they know the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
People don't feel appreciated. And it's one of the easiest things to do, right? Most of us think it. Um, I walk away from a discussion with someone and I think, wow, they really know their stuff. And I love the way they handled that situation, but I don't tell them.
Mm-hmm.
That's how most of us operate, right? And if you take the extra 30 seconds to, whether it's in public or to pull that person aside and say, hey, Katie, I know I don't say this often enough, but the way you handled that situation in that meet, I just love the way you bring such a way to, keep harmony when there's potential conflict in a group. And it's just one of those things that you do so well. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate it and how much it helps our team. That's it. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be a speech. What it has to be is authentic
Right.
and authentically you in the
Mm-hmm.
way that you would communicate it. And so these are little tips that, we teach people in how to engage themselves and others. But yeah, that burnout piece, so many centers are struggling with turnover and, turnover of staff and volunteers. And then you're trying to do everything on a budget that is tight, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have time to deal with, oh my gosh, my key people left in this area and now I'm
Right.
stuck. right? You see the ads on Facebook, we're looking for an equine specialist, we're looking for a CTRI, we're looking for a barn manager, right? And so somebody in development. So we have to start to think about, what do we change?
Mm-hmm.
And the change can start with simple things, new conversations that drive real results.
We had a huge shift at Hetra. I would guess it was about a year ago, maybe a little more, where we always do staff evaluations every year, because everybody should be. But we started doing this thing called a stay interview. And it was a lot of those questions that you were just talking about, Jeff. Like, what motivates you? What do you think our organization's doing well? What do you think our organization could improve on? Where do you want to be in 3 years? And how do you like to be recognized? And some of these questions that, like, as you're talking to someone, especially like as our executive director or somebody that you often don't get to spend a lot of just quality one-on-one time with some of those key members of your team, that you find out these questions. And it's not like that's something that you talk about over coffee, right? Like,
Right,
what
right.
motivates you or what? So
Yeah.
having an opportunity for us to really sit down and talk about that in a dedicated space was absolutely game changing for our organization. I believe for listeners, I think I've talked about this on another episode. I'll try to find that episode and link it back because we shared the stay interview questions that we use at Hetra. So I'll try and go back and find that to share for everybody. But I'm just glad that you mentioned that, Jeff, as something that helps people stay engaged, is asking those questions and taking time to hear the answer.
Yeah, and the stay interview is so important because we often focus on the exit interview, right?
Right.
Every organization has a process for
What did we
exit
do
interview.
wrong?
Yeah, investing the time and making the space, which I think is worth coming back to, is so important in that process. I mean, we often say to organizations, okay, you have a hiring plan, you have all the stuff you do up front to attract and recruit and hire your talent. You have a retiring plan, so you know what people are going to do, how you're going to either offboard people, whether it's, hey, I found a different position, I want to move to a different organization, or whether they're actually retiring, or whether you're retiring them for performance issues or whatever. So we have a hiring plan, we have a retiring plan. Very few organizations have an inspiring plan
Oh,
for
I
in the
like
middle,
that.
right? What do you do to, everything from stay interviews to how you change conversations, but it truly does require an investment in time. I was just
Mhm.
with an organization a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about how one of the issues that came out, and this is an executive team of a pretty big organization, they were talking about how, we just don't have time in meetings to get everybody's thoughts out, and so we have to kind of skip fast. And if you can't clearly articulate your thought, we move on. And I said to them, you have to understand that creating space is an investment. So
Mhm.
guess what? It might mean that hour-long meeting has to be an hour and a half. And everybody says, oh my God, not another meeting. I say, yeah, but it's not another meeting of the same kind,
Mhm.
right? We're talking about, if you truly want to do some of these things that engage and inspire people, it's going to require different behavior. And
Mhm.
that doesn't just mean of me, the person that works in the center. It means different behaviors of my management and my leadership team. We
Mhm.
have to start to make space to hear and really understand people and ask these kinds of questions that get us really good, meaty results that
Right.
we can distill into something that's going to help us with our programming, with our riders, with the value we provide in the community, and at the same time fulfill us as the people that work here or volunteer here. So it really is a different way of thinking, but you have to sort of look at it through some new lenses. And
Mhm.
think about, if you ran an organization, wouldn't you want to hear from the folks doing the crux of the everyday work? Wouldn't you want to hear their ideas about how to improve things? I mean, they're the ones that know the best.
Mhm.
They're doing this right all the time.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you the number of executive meetings I sit in, and we're going to have a workshop to decide what we're going to do next year. And I say, oh, this is great. It's the executive level view, looking at the rest of the organization. What are we doing to get the front line view?
Mhm.
And really try to understand that. And they sometimes say, well, we hadn't thought of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking to myself, so you're going to sit in a room and design how to do this without that?
The
Like,
people?
and the really good leader, they get it. I mean, they totally understand and they're way ahead and they do that. But there are still organizations I work with where they believe we design it in a room and it will magically come to life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, that is the right thing, you know, without
Right.
kind of thinking about all the pieces.
Do you have any tips on engaging volunteers? Because I know that as a staff, we can do lots of things because one, I mean, most of us are getting paid for that time, and we're there and that's our job. But I think engaging volunteers, because they are a huge foundational piece of our organizations for, especially us in the equine assisted services. So how do we keep them engaged and help them feel valued?
Yeah, so I can't say that we have a statistically valid sample on this,
Hmm.
but when we started our center saver approach of looking at um, engagement of staff and volunteers, in some of the centers in the pilot, we cut the data to just look at volunteers.
Hmm.
So it's not enough centers to say that this is true across the board, but
Yeah.
it is a small sample, you know. And one of the things we found was that volunteer engagement, in terms of how they measure engagement, was very high.
Mm.
And then we stepped back and said, well, that kind of makes sense. If you're volunteering for something, you're probably pretty engaged
Yeah.
in that, right? I mean, you're putting your time that you could spend anywhere, you're putting it
Exactly.
into this, and you're not even expecting something in return. So it
Hmm.
was kind of like, oh, that makes sense. I wonder how that would look in a broader study, you know.
Hmm.
But as we have more of that, maybe we can report back on it. But you know, I always go back to trying to understand that individual and what drives them. You know, we often say, what puts fire in your belly? Not that I ask people that, but I ask them in different ways.
Hmm.
You know, tell me about your best day volunteering here.
Hmm.
What was it? You know, and when they tell me about, oh, it's when I saw the smile on this kid's face, or it's when I do
Hmm.
this and I see somebody advance to that. And then I start thinking to myself, how can we put that into a motion that's maybe a new and different motion, even, right?
Hmm.
To help challenge us, which will get us a better result for our riders and the parents and the folks that are coming, as well as that individual,
Hmm.
because they're going to be way more engaged if they're part of designing something, right? And so they might help us design, you know, or the ones that are more analytical might help us want to design a scorecard of how we're. So it comes back to just like when we learn about horses and how horses operate, and then you have to learn, okay, that was the general stuff. Now I got to figure out how this specific horse operates. It's the same with people, right? So
Hmm.
how do you engage volunteers? I think you do some of the base stuff that you do across all bodies of folks that are working, right? And to
Hmm.
understand them generally. But then you have to delve into how do I understand this person on a more individual level so I can tailor some things, whether it's tailoring conversations or interactions with them, or whether it's having them help us tailor offerings and things we're doing here at the center.
Yeah.
So it to me it comes back to the individual. I got to figure out how to open that up and unleash the power that they're bringing to us.
Right. I think that is such a great it seems to be a universal thing, right? Like we want to engage people, we want to help people feel valued and needed. We figure out who they are as people, what makes them tick, and then engage them in that way, right? So I think that that's an important takeaway is that it's not that difficult. We just have to, like you said, change our behavior, which can be
Yeah,
difficult. So
yeah. It's
we just got to
behavior
take
change.
time to do it.
Even yeah, even giving volunteers, you know, here's three little points to share with people about the work you do at our
Yeah.
center. And here's two questions that, you know, one of the centers I work with, they have a little card for their board members
Hmm.
that you can put in a purse or a wallet, you know, and it's basically it's the top 10 things we want you to be able to share with people when you're telling them about our center.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I said, oh, let me see that, you know, and I pulled it out and it said like we serve 350 people per week. And our population we serve is made up of this. And we have these kinds of programs for corporate folks. And we
Hmm.
have these kinds of programs for folks with dementia. And we have these, right? And it gave you So it recognized that, hey, I understand you're a board member, but you may not always have the words to
Yeah.
articulate what we do and why we do it. Here's a little helper, right?
Hmm.
And thinking about that for volunteers, and
Yeah.
maybe it's not a physical card. Maybe we have to modify that a little bit, right? Maybe it's a Google Drive or something they can go to or
Hmm.
something on their phone or whatever, but a way to help you articulate not only what you do, but how you can use and work with those volunteers as your partner in helping to communicate what you
Mm.
do to the community,
Yeah.
right? So the beauty of volunteers is you have all kinds of different, and they're sometimes they're moving on to other places or whatever. But the beauty of that is you constantly have this new stream of a network, and that's
Hmm.
one of the things that I'm always preaching to centers about is you have to broaden your network
Right.
to that, whether it's the corporate community or other nonprofits, to
Hmm.
be able to get the word out and get more people there to volunteer, get more funding and donations. And everybody has a network. Just like
Yeah.
everybody has influence, everybody has a network, and you don't realize your own influence. We call it the long arm of influence. What you do, what you talk about, it has influence on people. What you wear, whether it's to work or to the barn, or what you wear to the grocery store on a Saturday. And somebody sees you walk by, they're sitting in their car. That has influence. Maybe somebody says, "Oh, you know what? I think I'm going to go home and take a shower today instead of laying on the couch," because right? And I'm not saying, I get dressed up to go to the grocery store, okay? But my point is that we as people, we don't realize the influence we have. And so
Right.
giving people tools to talk about, getting everybody to ask their neighbors, hey, I remember you saying you worked here at this office. Do you guys ever do anything to like a team building or a leadership activity? Oh, why do you ask? Well, we do that now at our barn,
Hmm.
right? Like it's that little stuff that I've seen yield some big things for centers.
Right.
And we can't always rely on, well, we put that in our newsletter. Well, we put that in our, and people, centers will tell me, oh, we do already put that on Facebook. And I say, well, if you want to look at trying to get more corporate partners, they're not looking on Facebook. You
Hmm.
have to have a LinkedIn presence. That's the other tip I'll give to your listeners is make sure your center has a LinkedIn page for the center and make sure all of the staff and volunteers create a LinkedIn profile and associate yourself with that center. And then you
Mm.
start to build, because that's where the corporate community is looking, right? It's
Right.
it's LinkedIn, or it's Facebook, but the professional side, not the social side. And
Yeah.
so, right? And so if you want that community more, you got to go to where they are and figure that out. So we've helped lots of centers get on that train of, okay, it doesn't have to be big or fancy, but let's get some LinkedIn presence where we
Hmm.
can start to help people see and understand what we're doing, how it impacts the community. We often talk about helping organizations do well while doing good.
Hmm.
They can do corporate workshops at centers, and they're doing well because they're developing their people as leaders in a way that's proven to help them retain more. And they're doing good because they're helping to fund something in their community that serves people in their community. Our
Right.
packaged corporate workshops have a sharing component where the center retains as much as 80% of the revenue that comes in for the workshops. And so, you're really truly helping something in your community, and companies love that, but they have to
Right.
know about it.
Exactly. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about that, building your network. And part of what you do at Leadership Adventures is, just as we've kind of touched on a little bit in the episode already, is helping centers make those links with, corporate relationships and developing using equine assisted services to develop their leaders, right? And then here we are developing relationships, and it's kind of like a full circle situation. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of that specifically, the corporate, do you guys call it corporate retreat? What's your terminology?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, we use the Equine Assisted Leadership Development Academy
Right.
as
Okay.
as its own entity, and that's has its own LinkedIn page and so forth. Um, but it's a series of workshops that can be from a half day to a full day to multi-day workshops that the Academy focuses on topics that are top of mind for organizations.
Okay.
So what we do is we get on the horn with that organization. We talk about What are the things they're going through? How are they trying to develop their people? And then we look at the packaged workshops we have and see what pieces we can pull to put something together. Or maybe it's one of our fully packaged, just off the shelf workshops, or maybe it's more custom and we have to design something specifically for that organization. And we have different levels. Our academy centers can get involved by being an approved center, which means they can offer our workshops. We get them brochures and all these things that say, hey, we now offer these accredited professional development workshops. Some people call it professional development, some call it leadership development. You can put it under the realm of team building, although, it includes, we call it team building plus, like it's much more than just a team building experience, right? So you got to have a way to sort of tell people you do it. And so we have approved centers that can do that. And then if somebody's interested, we come and do the workshop, and they still retain part of the money that comes in. It's like a little more than half of the money stays at the center. And then, we have licensed centers that can license our stuff, and they become certified to teach it. And then they retain a lot more of the revenue, almost 80 or more % of the revenue stays at the center. And so, sometimes it's even just a daunting thing for centers to hear words like revenue and money stays at the center. And, I've had a number of centers tell me we can't make money as a nonprofit. That is not true. So we have to bust through some of those myths. As long as you're leveraging the money that's coming in to be directed to your mission and driving more of your mission, then, you have to be able to have funding. And so we have a series of workshops, and then we have packages for centers that involves workshops and ongoing coaching, so that we've had organizations send people to workshops at the center, and then that same group, they come back once a month for a half day to the center for X number of months.
Okay.
And what they do when they come back is they're working on a service project for a half day that the center has predefined. But while they're all working on that service project, each one gets pulled out for a 30-minute coaching session.
Oh, neat.
So we teach the centers our coaching methodology, and literally they take a walk with a horse and they're having an individual coaching conversation, and we've seen that where we've measured it with hard metrics, leadership self-assessments, engagement surveys. We've seen those numbers go up as high as 40 or 50% in terms of self-assessment scores, right? So we know that it's very impactful for organizations to get involved with centers. And I don't believe that centers can't develop the stuff we're putting out there on their own. I'm a firm believer that if developing your own series of workshops is right for you, you should do that. We've tried to provide something that's more packaged for those centers that say, we want to be able to offer this stuff, but we don't want to deal with, getting instructional designers and information developers and trying to learn what organizations are going through today that they weren't going through last year, and try to build the right topics. But you might have the right people at your center or people on the board who want to do that. And if so, it's not magic dust or something. You can certainly develop the stuff we're doing on your own. We're just bringing a faster, accelerated approach to it, and we're bringing an accredited approach. So all of our workshops in the academy are accredited by SHRM and HRCI, which are the two largest human resources accreditors of training, as well as by Gallup and others, that do lots of experiential learning and training. So we get asked about EAL a lot. I mean, it's a hot topic. I've heard it's the fastest growing segment of the EAS industry. We're having a summit, or the first inaugural EAL summit. We're hosting and putting on at our Center of Excellence, one of our EALDA Center of Excellence in Roanoke, called Healing Strides. So we're super excited about that. It's in October. Just to give you an example, we had over 100 people want to submit abstracts for this.
It's incredible.
We have 6 universities, probably more than that now, but at the time I looked, are sponsoring this, researchers. But we wanted a way for people to be able to come together, and we called the theme of the conference Collaborate, Innovate, and Accelerate, because we truly want them to be able to collaborate, innovate, and accelerate their EAL at their center by learning from each other, learning from practitioners, learning from researchers, And so we've got a great lineup. It's not sponsored by any entity. Like, it's not a PATH conference. It's not an
Hmm.
ARCH. It's not an EGALA conference. In fact, all those folks are coming and talking about their stuff because we
Right.
feel, at least right now in the EAL world, there's not a one pill solution. You might need a little bit of this for your center and you like a little bit of that. And so you might pick and choose. So we got a lot of a la carte kind of folks coming to share. Our abstract review committee just last week finalized all the abstracts. So we had to get all these submissions down to, we have 3 tracks at the
Mhm.
summit, and 24 sessions across those tracks. And so all that communication is going to be happening this week, and people can see all the schedule stuff. It'll probably be probably early next week. It'll be on there's a web page just for the conference called equineassistedlearning.org. And that has all the details about the conference, which we call a summit because we believe that as leaders, and all of us are leaders because we all have influence. We believe that, yeah, you're constantly on a climb, and when you get to a summit, your goal is to help people up along the way. But also, leaders have to be looking out at the next summit they got to climb,
Right.
right? And so climbing a mountain is a series of summits and saddles that you work through.
Hmm.
And so we didn't want to call it a conference because we feel like it's a bit more of a journey. And so
Hmm.
we're really excited, about that summit coming up in October.
And it's more, I like that it's called a summit too, because it's more than a conference. It's more than sitting in lectures and learning things, right? It's definitely more collaborative than that. And it's more engaging, I would say. And I just want to also commend you, Jeff, for how organized you are and how much we've done a little bit of talking behind the scenes for all of you listening, and just the amount of very intentional thought that has gone into this summit and really like engaging all aspects of the equine community and being really thoughtful about that. So I would commend you for that, Jeff. You and your
Oh,
team are doing
yeah.
a great job.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
the summit, if you so say that I was to attend the summit that you guys are hosting, what am I going to learn primarily? Am I going to learn how to develop myself as a leader, or am I going to learn how to develop others as a leader and partner with equines along the way?
Yeah, so well, we got an abstract, we got a committee together, a planning committee for the summit. We have a separate abstract committee.
Mhm.
But our planning committee, we decided early on we wanted to have 3 tracks. So we have an equine welfare track that focuses on, because we get a lot of questions on that. How do I consider the horse in these
Mhm.
things and in designing it and horse selection and all those kinds of things? Then we have a corporate connections track, which is all about how do you connect to the broader community, that are beyond your typical riders, et cetera, in a lot of the ways that we talked about here. And we got people presenting on a variety of topics there. And then we have a track that focuses on the mental health and wellness side and the coaching and how you use EAL for everything from veterans to at-risk youth and those kinds of areas, first responders. And so what we did is we have a number of people that have submitted abstracts on things they're doing at their center, researchers, and we've asked them to focus on not just the what you're doing, but how you're doing it, because that's one of the
Yes.
questions we get. I decided through Leadership Adventures to start the conference because I field phone calls every month. People call and ask, what certification should I get in EAL? Is this better than that? And I say, I don't know, because we're more of the corporate piece, which is one slice of EAL, helping to
Hmm.
connect you with. So we had to bring in other centers, other practitioners, people who are doing these other aspects to
Hmm.
help us lead those tracks and shape that through all the different abstracts that got presented. So we have people presenting, I can tell you on some really unique things people are doing related to EAL for dementia and patients and their caregivers, and how you consider the horse when working with neurotypical tweens is one of
Hmm.
right. And so we've got all these different things that people are going to be able to take away in terms of content. But we also, I go to a lot of conferences and they have a theme, but then nothing really happens with a theme. It was just catchy words. Well, our theme is collaborate, innovate, and accelerate. And we're going to have 3 boards posted and everybody gets a little binder of Post-its that you have to, as you're, walking around or going to the coffee station or whatever, if you collaborated with somebody, write it on one of the posters, pop it up on the collaborate board. At the end of the conference, at the end of the summit, we're going to read off the ways in which we've impacted and influenced people to collaborate, innovate, and accelerate at this 2.5-day summit. And so we're really excited to make it experiential. It's low tech. It's this part of the conference in terms of, posting up little Post-its on a board,
I
but
love that.
we feel like it's a great way to keep people involved through the summit, that help us with what's working for you. What are you taking away that's going to help you collaborate, innovate, or accelerate EAL? Because we'll have people there who are trying to start EAL programs. We'll have people who are trying to advance their EAL or who are very advanced. And so we wanted to have a spectrum of offerings for them.
I love that. And honestly, I mean, it kind of makes our conversation come full circle, because we were just talking about in the beginning how, tech is great, but how do we focus on the people? And I think that's exactly what you're doing with the summit is, focusing on the people and how do we develop our current programs or accelerate them or whatever we're going to do with them to continue the sustainability for ourselves and our programs. So I think that's incredible. Well, quick question before I ask you that. Will any of this learning be released later, or will there be a virtual component? Because it's in, remind me, Roanoke, right?
It's in Roanoke, Virginia, at a center called Healing Strides.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful center and staff, and they host lots of big conferences and summits. So they're just so well equipped and so impressive. I think people are going to love being there at the center and seeing what all they do. We decided early on that in this first summit, it's an in-person only. Okay. So we were not able to get to the virtual point and having things released later. We did consider it, and we decided that we needed to do that. But, I think we're also learning through this, right? Absolutely. And so if that becomes something that people really want to do, and if we do this again, we'll certainly figure that out. But we felt like we had to put the focus on the in-person content and being there. So this time you got to come and join us. And it's a beautiful time of year. If you've never been in the Roanoke Valley, those mountains in peak foliage time in October.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. And the mountains that are right behind the center, it really, really ties into a summit.
Oh, I love that. Jeff, if someone wanted to learn more about the summit or more about what you do with Leadership Adventures, where can you point them to find additional information?
Yeah, so to get everybody focused on your LinkedIn presence, I'll point you there first.
Ooh, so I like it.
Presence on LinkedIn. You can look up Leadership Adventures. You can look up LinkedIn allows you to have showcase pages of certain offerings you offer.
Okay.
And so within our Leadership Adventures LinkedIn page, there is a showcase offering called Equine Assisted Leadership Development Academy. We have a website called myleadershipadventures.com. It is undergoing a complete overhaul, and that probably won't be done until early July. So it's not currently reflecting all the things we're doing. Probably the LinkedIn areas are more reflective today as we sit here. But yeah, those are the areas. You can certainly reach out to me or anyone on our team about the summit. And then there's a specific page for the summit, and it's called equineassistedlearning.org. And that's just all things summit. You can look at the content, the sessions. You can buy tickets there. There's discounts for 3 packs of tickets and all that kind of stuff. You can see our sponsors and entertainment we're having on the Friday night dinner, and all the food, your lunches and your dinner. It's included. We have a wonderful songwriter coming up from Nashville on Friday evening for the dinner that we're having, and so it's really, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think people take a lot away in terms of education, but also we wanted to be a little bit of a different kind of conference that had a more relaxed, hey, we're all learning through this. And so
I love that, because in equine assisted services, there is such a broad spectrum of people that might be one man or one woman shows, and are smaller and want it to stay that way. That's the way they like to be, right? Yep. And then there's some centers that are, multi-million-dollar deals. So it's important that we look at the picture from every lens. And I think you have been so intentional about that, Jeff. And so I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we've really tried to to think about these lenses as things you look through. And as leaders, you have to weight them differently. You have to blend them together to come to the right solution for you. However, with the knowledge of what you see when you look through the lenses, that may help you shape certain things, right? And so it's giving you a broader perspective from which to make decisions.
Well, I cannot say enough about all the things that you said today. I just think this episode will be so beneficial for so many people, whether you're looking at attending the summit or not. I think you are such a great advocate for our industry. You really get it, Jeff. So I appreciate you and all of your time that you spent with me today.
Thank you, Katie. Certainly appreciate your questions. They were thoughtful for sure, and love what you're doing with the podcast and all the stuff you have going on to help centers and services.
Absolutely. Okay, well, before I let you go, I ask all of my guests the same question for the season. And this season, it is, what is your golden rule? So what do you try to live your life by, kind of every day? I feel like this is going to be something profound.
Well, I don't know how profound it's going to be, but this is one that I remember being a young consultant right out of school. And I remember a mentor of mine, he was an older guy, and he shared this with me. And I later learned it was a famous quote. I think it was maybe Maya Angelou or one of the, somebody like that had this quote. But the quote goes something like, people will forget what you say. They'll even forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. And it's that last part of that quote that really is something that I try to be more intentional about. I can't say that I'm 100% there or perfect at this, but when you ask a golden rule you live by or you ascribe to live by, I am much more intentional now about thinking about that. How will this ultimately make the person or the situation feel? And, we have a saying that we talk about. Sometimes we'll get into some robust debate about things, right? And I can remember one situation where we were having lots of discussion and great healthy debate, which is healthy to have, And I remember at the end, someone saying, like, are we mad about this? And I said, no, we never let the situation, you never let the problem or situation get in the way of a relationship. This is about us trying to figure out the best thing. And so you have to blend that with how it's going to make people feel. But oftentimes, I'm not great at it, but I ascribe to being better at trying to think about, remember, is this person leaving this feeling like I'm really here to help them? Or are they leaving this conversation like I'm here to help me? And I'm trying to mask it as I'm trying to help them, because people can read through that right away, right? In 10 seconds, if somebody is there to serve them or to serve you. And so, that's one of the things that I've been working on more, and I'm getting better at it, but it's certainly one that you can always get better at. I can anyway.
I love that. It just, for some reason, I was thinking about when you were talking earlier about how people getting a pizza party or something, and it's like, I'm gonna forget someday you gave me a pizza party, but I'll never forget the way, you made me feel when you asked me how I felt about something or what my opinion was or whatever. I don't know. It was profound, Jeff, whether you knew it or not. That was good.
Yeah, well, think about people you've worked for in the past or worked with, and you can recall in 10 seconds in your head the people that when you just want to work with them more. And it usually goes back to how you felt, how they made you feel, right? And it's a wonderful thing to think about.
Yeah, great takeaway for today. Well, thank you, Jeff. I know you're super busy preparing for this summit and all the other awesome things you have going on. So I appreciate you sharing everything with me. We just wish you all the best.
Thanks so much, Katie. Really appreciate it. Take care.
That's all for today. But until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the Hetra University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.